It was one of those nights when the quiet seemed to stretch on endlessly, blurring everything beyond the windshield as I drove home from my late-night diner shift. The evening had been too quiet. Normally, the rush of customers or the constant hum of activity would keep me going, but tonight felt off. Despite the lack of excitement, I still had a strange burst of energy that lingered. I knew I'd be crashing hard as soon as I got home, but I also figured I'd need a melatonin to knock myself out. I was driving along my usual route, a winding road that was lovely in the daylight but unnerving when the sun went down. The road twisted through thick trees, with only a handful of dimly lit parking lots scattered between patches of darkness. These little lots usually marked the location of mom and pop diners or small family-owned shops, but everything was shadowed by the heavy canopy of trees that crowded in from either side. The lack of streetlights made the drive feel even more isolated, and the deep black of the forest made me feel like the world was closing in around me. It always gave me a strange sense of unease, like something was lurking just beyond the tree line. I was passing one of those little parking lots near a deli I recognized when I saw her. A woman was standing under a streetlight, her arm held out in a waving motion. I slowed my car as I noticed her more clearly. She looked like she was in her mid-50s, and though she wasn't heavy, she was very tall, around 6 feet, and her frame was quite thin. My first thought was that she looked odd, but I assumed she was just in need of help. I rolled my window down and called out to her, asking if she needed a ride. She came right over to the car, smiling widely and shouting that I was a hero for offering to help. I asked where she needed to go, and she told me, just up the road to town. She seemed harmless, but I couldn't help noticing how wet and bedraggled she was. Her clothes, which might have looked neat and put together on a dry day, were now clinging to her in a way that seemed out of place for someone in her condition. I also noticed that she was missing a few teeth, which was disconcerting. It made me wonder if she were homeless, though she didn't smell or look like she had been living on the streets. Maybe whatever scent there was had been masked. She kept smiling the whole time, though, and she didn't seem threatening at all. I figured I couldn't just leave her standing there in the cold. If she had been a man, maybe I would have hesitated, but I trusted my gut and let her in, telling myself I was doing the right thing. After all, it's important to help others when we can. I drove slowly, the wipers swishing back and forth in rhythm with my thoughts. We pulled up to a gas station at an intersection, one of the few landmarks on the road. I decided to fill up my tank. As I stopped at the pump, I turned to the woman and asked if she needed anything from the store. She smiled and waved it off, saying, "No thanks, honey." I walked inside to pay for gas and grabbed a few cans of spiked seltzers, figuring I'd need them since tomorrow was Friday, and I could finally relax for the weekend. When I returned to the car, I noticed that she was gone. I quickly glanced around the tiny parking lot of the gas station, but there was no sign of her anywhere. I figured she must have walked off somewhere, maybe to the nearby corner store or into the woods, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Still, part of me was relieved that she was gone. I quickly finished filling up and drove home, trying to put the whole strange encounter out of my mind. As I pulled into the driveway of my apartment, I immediately went inside, eager to get out of the cold. My apartment was on the first level of a two-family house, with a tenant upstairs. The door to the foyer was usually left unlocked, and then my apartment door itself was locked. I walked inside, dripping wet, and set my seltzers down on the kitchen counter. Despite my exhaustion, I wasn't quite tired yet. I decided to take a melatonin, hoping it would help me fall asleep quickly. However, no matter how much I tried to relax, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept drifting back to that woman. What had really happened to her? Where had she gone? Did I just imagine the whole thing? I heard faint noises from outside my bedroom, but I convinced myself they were just sounds from the upstairs tenant. I tried to push them aside, but I couldn't stop thinking about the woman. Eventually, I did manage to fall asleep. But then, in the middle of the night, I woke up. It was dark, but something felt off. I sat up groggily, my mouth dry, and reached over to grab my water. As I turned my head, I froze. There, crouched in the corner of my bedroom, was a figure. Someone was hiding behind my dresser, their legs folded beneath them. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I must have been hallucinating, right? I shook my head violently, trying to clear my vision, even slapped myself in the face, but the figure didn't disappear. It stood up and walked out of the room, moving silently. No footsteps, no sounds of a door opening or closing, just complete silence. I stayed completely still in shock, my heart racing. I didn't scream. I didn't say anything. I was paralyzed. After the figure had left, I couldn't hear anything outside my bedroom. It was as if the apartment had fallen into an eerie quiet. I grabbed my phone and immediately called my dad. He answered, sounding confused and half asleep. I told him what had just happened, and he calmly suggested it was probably just a night terror. I was still shaken, but I tried to listen to his voice, which was soothing. I stayed on the phone with him as I shakily got out of bed and turned on the lights in the living room. I checked every room of my apartment to make sure no one was hiding inside. Everything seemed fine, but the memory of what I saw haunted me. I tried to convince myself that maybe I had imagined it, or it had been a weird dream. Still, I locked the bedroom door before going back to bed, though I didn't sleep well for the rest of the night. The next morning, I went through my usual routine. I made coffee, got dressed, and prepared for the gym. But when I went to open the front door to the foyer, I was hit with an icy realization the door was already unlocked. My heart sank. I had locked it the night before, didn't I? What happened? What if the woman had been inside my apartment somehow? Had she somehow gotten in after I left to pay for gas? I wasn't sure. I checked my apartment again, looking for any sign that someone had been inside. But nothing appeared to be missing, except for one thing. The blanket I kept in the back seat of my car was gone, and there were damp stains on the floor of the back seat. It all came together in my mind. The woman had somehow snuck into my car while I was inside the gas station, and somehow she had found a way into my apartment too, or maybe I had accidentally left the door unlocked. I had no idea how she'd managed it. I called my dad again, frantic, asking him what to do. He told me that I should make sure nothing was missing, and if there was nothing of value gone, the police probably wouldn't be able to do much. But I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I checked again, confirming that nothing had been stolen, but my blanket was definitely gone. I spent the rest of the day in a fog of anxiety. I didn't go to the gym. I stayed cooped up in my apartment, scared to leave. I felt violated, unsettled, and disturbed by the events of the night. I didn't feel safe there anymore, and the thought of staying in that apartment was too much to bear. That month, I finally decided it was time to move out, but the memory of that strange encounter would haunt me for much longer. A few months ago, something happened that I remember as clearly as if it were yesterday. To this day, I can't quite explain why I went along, but I ended up accompanying my friend Jack to a house party during our freshman year of high school. I wasn't even on the guest list, but Jack had managed to pull some strings to get us in, and I felt too awkward to refuse. Looking back now, I wish I'd trusted my instincts and stayed home, but at the time, going along with Jack seemed easier. I had no intention of driving, so I relied on Jack for the ride. We got there late at night, and as soon as we arrived, Jack told me to leave my phone in the car. At first, I was confused. I didn't see the point my phone was my lifeline to everything, but Jack explained that it was safer. He said that in a crowded party, I might lose it, or worse, someone might snatch it when I wasn't paying attention. His reasoning made sense at the time, so I reluctantly left it in the car. We made our way into the house, which was modest but spacious, and then out into the backyard where the party was in full swing. The scene was like something straight out of a teen movie, people scattered in small groups drinking, smoking, and laughing loudly. Some of them were doing drugs, others just hanging out. I could tell that things were getting rowdy, but I figured I should at least try to mingle. Jack encouraged me to meet people, talk to a few of his friends, and enjoy myself. After a few hours, I found myself getting more and more out of sorts. The alcohol hit me harder than I expected, and I could feel my vision blurring and my mind clouding over. The once friendly chatter around me felt distant and muffled. I leaned against a wall near the house for support, trying to steady myself. That's when I noticed the time. It was either midnight or just past 1 in the morning. I knew I needed to leave soon before it got any later. I started looking around the yard for Jack to tell him I was heading out, but no matter how hard I searched, I couldn't spot him. I went up to a few people I recognized and asked if they'd seen him, but no one had. My frustration grew, and I realized I couldn't stay there any longer. I reached into my pocket to grab my phone and call Jack, but I froze when I remembered I had left it in the car. It felt like a punch to the gut. Now, without a way to contact anyone, I was stuck. The only option was to walk home. The thought of walking alone at night didn't appeal to me, but I remembered my house wasn't that far from where the party was, and the night wasn't too cold, just a bit chilly since it was fall. I briefly considered asking someone at the party to take me home, but I didn't really know anyone else there, and I didn't want to bother anyone. So, with a resigned sigh, I decided I'd just walk it off. I stumbled out of the backyard, making my way toward the street, trying to keep my balance as my legs felt unsteady under me. The walk was slow and difficult. I felt lightheaded, dizzy from all the drinking, but I pressed on, hoping I would make it home without any further issues. As I walked down the street, my thoughts began to drift. I couldn't help but think about why Jack had left me alone at the party. Where had he gone? Why had I listened to his stupid idea of leaving my phone in the car? Now I couldn't even call him to find out where he was. I cursed myself for being so careless, for drinking too much when I knew I shouldn't. I started to feel more and more uneasy, especially as I continued walking alone in the dark, my mind running wild. I was tired, so I stopped walking for a moment to catch my breath. I crossed my arms over my chest to keep warm and stood there for a minute, contemplating what to do next. That's when it hit me: hitchhiking. I'd never done it before, but it seemed like my best shot. Maybe someone would see me and offer a ride home. I stuck out my thumb and waited, watching as a couple of cars passed by without slowing down. I wasn't sure if they didn't see me or if they just didn't care, but none of them stopped. The minutes dragged on, and I started feeling even more uneasy. I was standing there, feeling vulnerable, and I hated the feeling. I was about to give up and continue walking when, finally, a gray truck pulled up in front of me and stopped. I felt a rush of relief and a little hope. A man rolled down the window, revealing an older, rough-looking guy with a thick beard. He asked me if I needed a ride. I nodded, almost eager to get out of the cold, and told him where I lived. He said he could take me, so I climbed into the truck, feeling a little bit safer, at least for the moment. As we started driving, the man tried to make small talk, asking what happened to me. I was too drunk to carry on a decent conversation, so I just mumbled and groaned, barely able to form words. But I appreciated the silence between us. It gave me time to focus on getting home. But then, as we turned a corner and I recognized my street, a sense of unease crept over me. Something wasn't right. The truck kept going, driving past my house, and my gut told me that I needed to get out. I gathered whatever energy I had left and started to tell the man that he had passed my house, but before I could speak, he turned to me with a sinister look on his face. "You know, you shouldn't be drunk while you're hitchhiking. "You'd make a very easy target," he said, his voice cold and mocking. His words sent a chill down my spine. Then, to my horror, he reached over and began rubbing my leg. I froze, panic rising in my chest as I realized exactly what was happening. I couldn't think straight, but I knew that I had to get out of that truck. Before I could act, a loud siren blared behind us, and the truck's interior was suddenly flooded with flashing red and blue lights. I almost couldn't believe it, but I was relieved beyond words. It was the police. The man seemed to panic. He slammed on the brakes, but the doors were locked. I didn't care. I threw myself against the door, struggling to unlock it, and when I finally did, I jumped out of the truck. I ran as fast as I could toward the police officer, who had already gotten out of his car and was rushing toward me. I told him everything, about how I had gotten drunk, how I had hitched a ride, and about the man's creepy behavior. Unfortunately, the officer explained that nothing illegal had happened at that point. The man in the gray truck had been reported for stealing something from a store, and they were looking for him. I don't know if it was the same guy who had picked me up, but I didn't care. I was just relieved to be out of that situation. The officer gave me a ride home, and I made a vow to myself right then and there I would never let myself get so drunk again that I couldn't think straight or keep track of my surroundings. I learned the hard way how important it is to stay aware, no matter the circumstances. I was lucky that night, but I knew I couldn't count on luck forever. It was late, and I was driving home after an exhausting double shift at the hospital. The highway stretched out endlessly ahead, bathed in the cold glow of moonlight. I wanted nothing more than to crawl into bed, but the long stretch of road between me and sleep was relentless. That's when I saw him. He stood at the edge of the road, thumb outstretched, his figure illuminated briefly by my headlights. A hitchhiker, tall and lean, wearing a tattered coat that flapped in the wind. His head was slightly bowed, but as I approached, he looked up. For a fleeting second, I thought he locked eyes with me. I never pick up strangers. Every self-preservation instinct screams against it, but something in his stance caught me off guard. He didn't look desperate or menacing. He looked resigned, as if he'd been waiting for me. Against my better judgment, I slowed the car and pulled over. He climbed in without a word, the door creaking ominously as he closed it behind him. His face was obscured by the dim light, but his voice was soft and polite when he finally spoke. "Thank you." No one else would stop. I forced a smile, glancing at him out of the corner of my eye as I pulled back onto the road. "Where are you headed?" "Anywhere," he paused, then added with a chuckle, "Anywhere but here." We drove in silence for a while, the tires humming against the pavement. I tried not to fidget, but there was something unsettling about his stillness. He didn't adjust his coat, didn't fumble with his hands. He just sat, staring straight ahead, as if lost in thought or waiting for something. "You've been driving a long time," he said suddenly, breaking the quiet. His tone was conversational, but the words made my skin crawl. "Yeah, just finished a shift at work," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "You've been out here long?" He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was low, almost a whisper. "Long enough." I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, my pulse quickening. The air in the car felt heavier now, oppressive. So I said, attempting to sound casual, "What brings you out here?" "Visiting someone." "No," he turned to me then, his face fully visible in the dim light. His eyes were dark, too dark, and his expression wrong. There was something off about his smile, like he was mimicking a human emotion he didn't fully understand. "I'm just passing through," he said, his gaze unwavering. "But you..." You shouldn't have stopped. My heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? He leaned closer, and I felt the hairs on my neck rise. You should have kept driving. People like me were better left alone. I slammed on the brakes, the car screeching to a halt in the middle of the empty highway. Get out, I demanded, my voice trembling. He didn't move, didn't even flinch. Instead, he tilted his head, studying me like I was a curiosity. It's already too late, you know. Once you let someone like me in, there's no going back. I reached for my phone, but it wasn't in the cup holder where I'd left it. Panic surged through me as I glanced around the car, only to find it sitting on the dashboard when had it moved. You won't find any help, he murmured, his voice echoing strangely. Without thinking, I threw open the door and bolted, leaving the car and him behind. The cold night air bit at my skin as I ran, the sound of my heartbeat drowning out everything else. When I finally dared to look back, the car was gone. The highway was empty, as if I'd imagined the whole thing. But I knew I hadn't. To this day, I don't drive at night. I tell myself it's because I need the sleep, but deep down I know the truth. Somewhere out there, he's still waiting for another car to stop, waiting for someone else to let him in.